Striving to get into a good routine and building consistency is something we all do, and it's great. But there's a risk of getting too comfortable and limiting your growth. In this week's Hot Seat episode, Jonathan shares with the group his philosophy on when and how to break good habits in a way that leads to both personal and business growth. I'll be back at the end to recommend another episode. Enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, there's this mantra that gets repeated all of the time that goes, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. And I don't know where that started. I don't think it's necessarily always wrong, but I do think that it is um overly simplistic, edging on probably being wrong in almost every case. And this is one of the problems that I have with a lot of the self-development that's out there, is that it's well-intentioned, but in order for it to be really, really catchy, it kind of has to be summed up in a really quick hit statement. And the statements that are most memorable are often contrasting statements. When you look at the most popular book titles, or when you look at the most popular phrases, they very often have an element of contrast in them. I mean, this is a way to make your content stand out too, to be honest. If you can figure out lines that have contrast. But there's also often more to it. And so I wanted to talk about a little bit of kind of where I think that there's more to it. And I've got some notes here that I'm bringing up. So excuse me as I bring up one because I had the wrong thing open. Here we go. I had it open actually, and then I closed it. We seem to revel in denying ourselves things these days, where the more we achieve, the more the bands of our lives tend to be restricted. And I guess that makes sense, whereby as we achieve more, as we accomplish more, as we have children, as we take on more, we kind of have to figure out how to control our time. But I don't think that that should be in every time, all the time thing. There's this kind of autopilot that is very easy to fall into, isn't there? Where, I don't know, I mean, what's the line? Edith Wharton was the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize. And one of the things that she said is, she said, the producer of old age is habit, the deathly process of doing the same thing in the same way at the same hour, day after day, first from carelessness, then from inclination, at last from cowardice or inertia. That idea of inertia kind of jumped out at me. Well, because it's true. We fall into this autopilot based off of inertia. And I think that habit is necessary, but I think that the habit of having careless habits kind of turns a trail into a rut. And I want to talk about perhaps strategically breaking that for periods of time for very specific reasons, where it doesn't have to be a hell yes. In fact, it could oftentimes, a knee-jerk reaction is to say hell no. The problem that I have with that idea of it's a hell yes is that things that come natural to us are always going to feel like a hell yes. Things that are difficult are always going to feel like a hell no. But it's the difficult things often that we most need to do. So I think we should say yes more often. But I want to ask you guys a question. So pull up the chat, because I want you to type in your answer here. Well, first, let me ask you a question. Does anybody know the year that Gandhi was born? Don't look it up. Nobody? Okay. In the chat now, I would love for you to give me the earliest you think that he was born and the latest that you think that he was born. Okay, type that into the chat for me, and I'll read out some of the answers. We had 1900 to 1920, 1850 to 1875, 1900 to 1930, 1908 to 1920, and so on and so on and so on. Here's what I find interesting about this. I don't expect you to know what year Gandhi was born. Okay. But when I asked the question of what's the earliest year you think that he was born, and then what's the latest year you think that he was born, if your goal was to answer the question properly, you would have created the widest band possible, wouldn't you? You would have said, I bet you he was born at somewhere between the year 1600 and today. Because you would have gotten the question right. And so Gandhi was born in 1869. So a few of you got that right. Johnny, you just missed it, man. 1870. Megan, 1850 to 1920. You got it. Jonathan, yeah, 1865 to 1925. You're the closest without going over. Congratulations. But what you notice here about just about all of these answers, in fact, the ones where they were right have the widest bands. The ones that were not right, only a 20-year band, right? 1900 and 1920, 1900 and 1902, 1850 to 1875. So Gus, you got it right, but your band was also really, really tight. So this is a question that was asked. There's somebody who basically runs this agency of like some of the smartest people on the planet, and huge corporations hire them to answer impossible questions to answer with the greatest element of certainty that can be achieved. Things like, what color is going to be popular for youth fashion next year, for example? Questions that are really important for brands to know, but how could you possibly answer them? And so what this guy does is he recruits brainiacs, but he recruits brainiacs and he specifically tests them to make sure that their bands are appropriate based off of how much confidence they should have in their answer. So my friend Jason reported on this in his book called Building for Tomorrow, which is where I got this from. And Jason gives this same example in a bunch of talks that he gives. He talks at all these major corporations and stuff. And he gives this example at a bunch of talks that he gives. And he says, what's interesting is I've probably done this experiment now in 30 different instances in public talks. And there's one situation where overwhelmingly the audience gets it right. And he says, it's at the colleges. He says, the older the people are that I work with, it seems the less chance. And the more successful the people are that I work with, it seems the less chance that they're going to get this right. Not because I expect them to be smart enough to know or historically inclined enough to know when Gandhi was born. It's on purpose a question that people kind of know probably about when it is, but like nobody really knows exactly when it is. And so all that he's doing is he's testing, understanding that you probably have a reasonably low confidence in your answer. And so he's testing how tight or how loose you make your bands. One of the things that I've figured out is as I experienced more, as I learned more, as I met more people, naturally my bands became more and more constricted. And that's because the types of people that I see and the types of experiences that I have kind of self-select for more like it. I surround myself with people that I like who think the same way as me. I do work in an industry that I like with other people who also like that industry, who generally think the same way as I do within that industry. It's actually been really interesting for me the last couple of years. I've gotten much more involved in the CrossFit industry, simply because I've just started doing CrossFit and I kind of like it. And so I've gotten more involved in it and I've met more people there. But I never knew that, I knew that CrossFit existed, but I never knew anything about CrossFit until really 2 years ago. People who do CrossFit think fundamentally differently than a lot of other areas of fitness. And neither person I don't think is wrong. I think there's pieces that you can pick at with CrossFit for sure. I think there's pieces you can pick at with just about anything. But entering in that world and meeting people I would not otherwise meet has expanded my bands within the fitness industry. And now, as I'm producing my own workouts, I can take ways of programming, for example, that are central to CrossFit, like EMOMs every minute on the minute, or the 40-second on, 20-second off um, type protocol that can be really, really useful. And I wish that I knew about them when I was programming for clients. Because I can even think now, 15 years later, I can think of clients that I wish I knew about that way of programming back then, because it would have served them better. But at the time, I was going to the same conference year after year after year. I was only going to perform better, for example. And so, yeah, there's only so many times you can hear Gray Cook say the same thing, basically. Come from, not say the same thing, but come from the same school of thought. And it's valuable for what it is. But we need to expand these bands. And I think saying yes to more things, and I'll talk to you about how I do it, or a few ways to do it, is a great way to expand our bands for very constrained, specific periods of time with very specific desired outcomes that we want. Because when you say yes to something you wouldn't normally say yes to, what happens is you naturally begin exploring somebody else's world, right? You ride somebody else's ride. I met a guy named Steve when I was in Mexico, and he still runs a little law firm, and he runs men's groups and things like that. And so a friend of a friend invited me to a men's group that he was putting on because he goes to Mexico to do it. And one of the things that he discovered, because he had fallen into a rut back at home, well, he was just going through the motions operating this law practice, this little law practice. He had a few people working for him. He discovered that the best way to break old ways was to break his routine first. And the only way for him to understand where he was in life was actually to go somewhere else, to get out of his autopilot, and by checking out of his day-to-day in order to check back in, kind of renewed as a new person. I've been reading a lot because I put together the option proposal for my next book, not The Obvious Choice, but the next one. And so I've been reading a lot about purpose. I've been reading a lot about topics like how do you choose the right path in life? How do you realign yourself once you've figured out that you're on the wrong path? And so I've been looking into, I've read a lot from religious leaders from different religions, which has been really interesting. But I've also read a lot of accounts, and I've always read a lot about this, read a lot of accounts and listened to a lot of accounts from people who are ranging from in elderly homes to in palliative care, to things that they wrote before they died. And this is generally older men and women, but sometimes it's younger men and women who find out that they have a terminal disease and write a book about what they're thinking about before they die. Like pretty morbid stuff, but also what better way to avoid making mistakes in life than to listen to somebody who's lived a full life and figure out what they regret and figure out what they think that they got right. And so there was a passage I came about in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, and it was by an 85-year-old man who learned that he was dying. What he said was that if I had my life to live over again, I'd try to make more mistakes next time. I'd start barefoot earlier in the spring and stay that way later in the fall. If I had to do it again, I'd try to figure out a way to make more mistakes next time. That hit me pretty hard. Not the thing about wearing no shoes. I don't like wearing shoes either, but that wasn't the part that hit me so hard. So let's talk about this a little bit before I get into a couple examples of, and I'll give you some stories of people that have expanded their bands and kind of what they've done and why they've done it and the period of time that they've done it with the outcomes. But I don't know. Michael, what do you think, man?
The thing that when you were talking, the thing that I was thinking was like, so you talked about that check out and check back in. Uh,
Hmm.
and even this one day, that I've had, Memorial Day, I observed yesterday,
Yeah.
it kind of took me out of my rhythm. And I did think about my week a little bit more, and I looked at it and I was like, you know what? My things used to actually be tight. I had really specific times for really specific things.
Mhm.
And it allowed, I mean, I feel like today I was more on point, but then I think broader, um, man, I was like, I started this business in 2020, and
Right.
2020 was good. 2022 was great. 2023 was okay. And it's like I'm questioning, am I even on the right path with this? You know? Um, so I think it's kind of making me feel like maybe I need to step back and really reflect on everything that I'm doing in life. And just give it some deep thought, because I have not done that in a long time. So I mean, I stepped out, I kind of stepped out yesterday and just looked at business. But I think
Yeah.
even taking, zooming out, taking a 30,000-foot view of everything that I've done in the past few years, because there have been some major changes since 2020. I think it's really important to do, and it's something I haven't done for a long time. Um, so those are the thoughts that come to mind
I
through the
I
beginning of this conversation to now.
I didn't even put together that it was, of course, the day after Memorial Day because I'm, Canadian. But it brings to mind. So, I mentioned I'm doing a lot of reading from various religions and also speaking to people. I'm seeking out leaders across various disciplines because it's like if you want to study the most powerful force on earth, like whether you agree with it or not, like I still don't know where I stand with religion, but it's unquestionably the most powerful force on earth. And with all of technology, it's growing, not shrinking. And so you got to question why. And you've got to say there has to be something here that is valuable for people. In a world where we don't have to excuse lightning bolts because we don't know that they're electricity yet as an act of God or the devil when it hits our wooden farmhouse and explodes into flames. We don't need to explain away things we don't understand like that anymore with religion. Religion is still growing so much. And people increasingly seem to be taking aspects of various religions and applying it to their lives in ways that serve them. And so you see certain aspects of different religions that are growing, and one of them is Shabbat. So for Christians, it's the Sabbath, right, on Sundays. For Jews, it's Shabbat, basically 3 stars in the sky Friday to 3 stars in the sky on Saturday. And Shabbat is, well, let me take a step back. There was a big study in Sweden that happened where they studied antidepressant use as a way to measure happiness of society. So not a perfect measurement, but basically the only way to really measure it. And what they did first is they gave this group of people an extra 4 weeks off of holiday. So instead of whatever it was, 2 weeks, they gave them the 6 weeks off of holiday every single year. And what they noticed is that it actually didn't have any impact at all on happiness. If anything, it had a slightly negative impact, but not enough to be meaningful. So they were confused. They were like, more time off. This should make people happier, right? Work less. But then what they did is they changed it, is they actually didn't give them any more time off. But what they did is they gave everybody the same 2 weeks off. And they said, nobody is allowed to work for these 2 weeks. Everybody has these 2 weeks off. And they saw a marked improvement in happiness. Really, really meaningful. And the researchers explained it away as time off when your company is still working doesn't allow you to disconnect, and time off when you're not with your community and your friends isn't really time off, isn't really enjoyable. Whereas Shabbat, or the Sabbath in religious communities in Christianity, everybody has off. So in Judaism, you have to walk. Nobody's allowed to work, and you're not actually allowed to use machines, basically. So you have to walk to synagogue if you're religious, which means you have to live in a very close proximity to the synagogue. It's created huge problems in Toronto because where the Orthodox synagogues are, the property is so ungodly expensive that nobody can afford to live there. That's a whole nother story. So everybody lives very close to one another. Everybody is off at the same time every single week. And they go to synagogue, but then they also just walk to their friend's house, have a brunch together, throw a ball around, play a board game. I had somebody who was a creative director for a lot of years, was an Orthodox Jewish guy, and he read a book every single Saturday. He read a full fiction book every single Saturday. And what I love about that is that exactly what happened to you on Memorial Day, Michael, consider if that were to happen to you every single week, where it's a planned checking out to check in every single week. And you're not even allowed to work because the Sabbath, it used to be everything was closed on Sundays. I don't know if it's the same with you, but like everything's open on Sundays where I live. Like Sunday is not a day of rest. Sunday is a day to get all the shit done that you've put off for the rest of the week and then get started again on Monday. Well, it didn't used to be like that, and it's not designed like that. And I think actually best served, it is not like that. I think actually best served, it is legitimately a day to rest, because what that does is it forces you for the rest of the week to make the rest of your week better and more structured in a good way so that you do have this day of rest to reflect, to be with the people that you love. So that's what I thought about as you were saying that. And I was really happy that you brought that up. Allison and I, she's Christian, I'm Jewish. Traditionally, neither of us are particularly religious. But I've been feeling a pull back to something. I mean, I listen sometimes instead of podcasts, I listen to sermons from preachers. I'm not Christian. It's powerful, man. You want self-development stuff? Like you look at like new age spirituality or energetic work or whatever it is, it's the same shit rebranded. Call it whatever you want to call it. It's really, really powerful. And so Allison and I are going to adopt some sort of Shabbat practice into our lives and our family's life. We don't know exactly what it is, and we're going to design it in a way that works for us. But it's it's cool that you had that realization yesterday. Jonathan, you said that you have some stuff to add.
Yeah, I'm in this interesting situation where my life, at least for me, feels like it's changed so much in 3 years. I went from like an in-person coach with a daughter living in New York City and like never planning on leaving New York City, never planning on going online virtually and training online,
Right.
to living in Quebec in a neighborhood that mostly is French first, to having a son and a daughter, and to being like 50% online, 50% virtual. So
Right.
I thought a lot about how like I've brought some of my, because thinking about, I've always been very suspicious of like the power of habit and all that. My understanding is that reality is too dynamic, emergent, and multi-layered to really use rubric or pattern to truly wake up and pay attention to what's happening. Of course, it's useful and we all do it automatically, but so this is something I've thought about a lot for a long time. But what I've noticed is how have I brought my own cocoons, my own habits, my own comforts into this new environment where I can totally recreate myself, right? And there's only a certain amount of chaos that's useful. I think I'm leaning a little bit too much towards too much chaos and not enough there's definitely a balance there that and it probably needs to cycle, and because right now I feel like I'm a bit living in two places. So there's that piece then there's like the training piece, because I was coming out of Peak Performance, as you know, was like,
Yeah.
I trained out of there for 10 years, was rated the 7th best gym in the country by Men's Health way back when like print magazine mattered. And it was such a strength training culture, right? So there's that, I had such a bias towards strength training for so long, but bodybuilding was my first love. Bodybuilding is what helped me rescue myself from addiction. And so I've been back when I train in Canada. It's funny because in New York City, I'm at like the fanciest, most exclusive gyms.
Yep.
But then in Canada, I work at Econo Fitness. And when I
Yeah.
first saw,
You went from charging $350 US an hour to, Econo
I still
Fitness.
charge that. I still charge that because I can make US dollars, but most of my expenses are Canadian,
Oh, no, but you don't charge that at Econo Fitness in Quebec.
No, I don't train at all. Well, I lost all motivation to try to train people in person in Canada because I can train so much more and it's
Right.
valued so much more in New York. So I don't even attempt here. So when
Right.
I'm here, I'm in this mode of like purely virtual, but I don't get a lot of my like sensory emotional needs met. Thank God for this mentorship. Of course it's virtual, so it's anyway. So, but the Econo Fitness here is super bodybuilding culture, and it allows me to like fall back in love with that in such a cool way. So like I'm right where you're at, like living it and trying to figure it out for myself.
I think there's two pieces that came to mind there. The first one is a little bit shorter, so I'll start with that one, but they're in no particular order. I think, I mean, I've gotten to a certain point, and your basic needs need to be taken care of course, first, but it goes beyond money and what you, I'm so happy that you're bringing all these things up because all of these things are covered in the book that I'm doing the proposal for. But there's a chapter that talks about giving away more to get more. And it's actually not about philanthropy. It's about it's about understanding that if there's an aspect of what you do or something you own that's holding you back, you should give it away without any care or consideration whether that's fair financially. Because what you will find and what you'll gain goes far beyond the money, and very often it actually does result in more money anyway. And so in your case, I'm not saying that this is right or not right. The only reason that training people makes no sense for you in Econo Fitness is because you're used to earning $350 an hour US training people in the States. Because that's your new normal. That's where your bar has been set, right? And so for you to trade your time to train people in the gym where you are in Quebec makes no sense financially. And so it might feel like you're giving away to do it. It's not a fair trade, right? Because we think of most trades in terms of financial value. I would argue that the most important trades that we make, finances should not be a core consideration. I mean, this mentorship is a prime example of that. I gave Jason a very large portion of this mentorship. He didn't buy into it. Now, he helped build it along the way and he helps operate it. And I'm doing the same thing with Quick Coach. I have somebody who's in the late stages working on his first project where I'm going to give him 40% of Quick Coach. Literally, just give it to him. I'm not selling him shares, nothing like that. No, I mean, I'm protecting long-term, of course. It's not just going to be his on day one. But that's a terrible financial trade. And all of my business buddies are like, what are you doing? You should sell shares. You should get it valued. You should do this. I was like, number one, that sounds hard. Number two, that sounds like it involves lawyers. And I just have decided I just never want to deal with lawyers any more than possible in business. But also number three, what I'm going to get and what I've gotten from having Jason operate this mentorship is that I can now show up and talk to people like you, like this, and fill me up and fill up that cup that way. And Jason has enough skin in the game to do it where he can grow it. And as a result, financially, it's grown way more than it ever would have myself. But the only reason that that happened is because I made, at the time, a really bad financial trade, which was a really good personal trade because it allowed me to focus on what I love and what I find fills me up. And Jason the same way. So I bring that up to you, and it's kind of a stretch to make the connection, but giving away your time, perhaps, to work with a few people in a Kano gym to get back to your roots for bodybuilding might not be a good financial trade, but it might be a wonderful personal trade.
It's funny because I'm actually going to train someone on Thursday just for fun because I'm excited to train them at Econo Fitness. So it's like very much in alignment. And I'm like, I don't even care about the money. I'm just excited to do it for some reason.
Yeah, which is great, man. The other thing that came up as you were talking about that, I said there were two things, and the first was short, and then it ended up not being short. But the second one is has to do with rules. And the paradoxical reward for accepting reality's constraints is that they no longer feel constraining. Rules make me feel safe. When I know the rules, I'm less stressed. But the catch is that they need to be my rules, not rules imposed upon me. I think it's very important to set our own collection of black and white rules. I have a list of them. I won't read you them all, but some of them are as silly and as little as if the light is red, even if there's no cars, I stop and wait. Because that's just an opportunity to pause and take in the surroundings. Stupid, small, but it really does measurably improve my day to day. And then there's business stuff where I have a rule that email isn't a task. It's a place where tasks accumulate. So if I open up my email, I'm doing one of two things. Either I'm organizing my emails into tasks, which go into folders, or I am dealing with one of the tasks, which is already in one of the folders. So all of my invoices are in a folder that's invoices. And it's my time where I need to pay my bills because it's the end of the month, like today, for example. But then there's rules that I think are just good rules to remind ourselves and snap us back to the smart part of our brain because the stupid part of our brain seems to take over in a lot of cases. For example, I have a rule that just goes, say the nice thing you're thinking. If you think something nice about somebody else, say it. Because I don't know about you, but for some dumb reason, every time I think something nice about somebody else, my brain starts to go into all of these worry, like, oh, here's all of the reasons why I shouldn't say that thing. In other words, just never resist a generous impulse. The same thing. If I feel like doing something, like buying something for somebody or whatever it is, just knee jerk, just do it right away. Don't even think about it. And so, I mean, whatever. Whether you agree with those rules or not, what's important, I think, is I think it's a good thing to have rules that we decide to govern us. Part of having those rules, by the way, is saying yes to a lot of stuff and experiencing a lot of stuff that's different and new to be able to reconnect yourself to who you are and what you want to do by exposing yourself to different things. Let me give a couple of those examples. So which one do I want to give first? Okay. I have one friend, only one. His name is John. Also, And John, many years ago, was in this rut. He was doing a job he didn't really like. He's a construction scientist. He's a building engineer. And sorry, he's not a building engineer because he's not an engineer. He's a construction scientist. He was working in custom home building. He really didn't like the job. It was dragging on him, but it was all of his time, and he was tired at the end of the night, and he didn't have a girlfriend, and he was lonely, and he was just in that kind of rut. We were young. We were in like our mid-20s, right? And he sent me a message one day, and he's like, bro, it's my month of yes. It's like, what? How does that mean? It's like, it's my month of yes. Anytime anybody asks me to do anything this month, I'm just going to say yes, and I'm going to go. And John's like me, like a little bit more social, but like kind of nervous to go out and shy and all this stuff. Right? So I'm with him one night, a couple weeks later. It was still in his month of yes, and we were at a vodka bar in downtown Toronto. Now, this was probably the last time that I've ever been in a vodka bar in downtown Toronto. But we were in this vodka bar in downtown Toronto because somebody who he knew asked him to go there. And he's like, hey, you want to come? And I was like, yeah, screw it, whatever, sure. So I went. And there was this girl there who was a friend of the friend that also invited him. There was like, multiple groups of people going to this bar. And her name's Sarah. And John and Sarah started talking. And Sarah, at one point in the night, started to leave. And she walked out the door, and she walked out the front door. And we were in Yorkville, Toronto, for anybody who's ever been. And she was down the street. And all of a sudden, John just looks at me and he's just like, it's yes month. And he walks out the door. And then about 3 minutes later, we see John walk back in with Sarah. And my friend Chris Jackson was with us. Now, to paint the picture, I went to a very white school. Chris Jackson was one of the 3 black people in the school. And so Chris was the only black person with us. And he looks at John, and he looks at Sarah, and he looks at me, and he does this a few times, right? Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then he just yells across the whole bar. He's like, yo, he brought her back. He brought her back. John's now married to Sarah. They have 2 kids. They've been together since that day. And so the first time that I think we should say yes is if we feel like we're in any sort of a rut where we're on autopilot, where we can't feel like we can get out of the space that we're in for whatever reason. Whether it's a month, whether it's a few weeks, whatever time period you want it to do. But I do think that it's valuable for it to be a time period. I think having a say yes month is a wonderful thing. You never know where it's going to lead you. So number 1 is if you're what I call suffering bore out, not burnout, bore out. Try a say yes month. It's great. John met his wife. The second story I'll tell you is my parents decided that they wanted to leave Canada for the winters. This is like 11 years ago. My mom slipped on ice and fell, broke her arm, was scared to go outside. And they decided that that was just going to be the last winter that they spent in Canada. It wasn't worth it. And so all of their friends that they grew up with went to Florida, went to Orlando, right? And they went there 1 year with them, and they decided that they were 40 years too young for that place. And so they had to go to a new place. And so they discovered Scottsdale, Arizona, and they went there for 1 year, and they decided that this was going to be the place that they wanted to be in. It was active, it was young, they liked the temperature. And but the problem is that they didn't know anybody. They didn't know a soul. And so the next winter that they went back, they decided that their only goal that winter was to build a new community in this new place. And all of their decisions centered around that. They learned how to play bridge because they figured out that bridge was a really great people to a really great way to meet people. And so they went to bridge clubs, and they went out of their way to invite people that they played with at bridge to play games at their place. They got a unit so Scottsdale was mainly little like developments, right? It's a very driving type place. It's all developments. And so there's walkways within the developments, and people go for walks and stuff all the time. They got a unit the unit that they rented on purpose was on the ground floor, right in the middle where the two walking paths converge. So everybody had to walk past it. And almost every day they sat outside of their unit, and they'd just be talking. They'd be having a drink, they'd be talking, whatever. And they'd say hi to people going by because they wanted to meet people. And so the second time to say yes is if you're exploring a new community, if you want to build a new community in a new place. I think that what they did was brilliant. They decided that they wanted to build a new life in this place for the winters. And now they have, I mean, we go to visit them for a month or two at a time, and they don't even have time for us because they have so many social commitments. And it's all because they designed that. So I think the second time to really say yes is I want to involve myself in a new community. And that means that I'm going to take myself to places where that community hangs out or where I think that it'll be easier. And I'm going to be the one to oftentimes initiate social anything and invite people in. I'm certainly going to say yes and take part and be the one to show up always. We did this when we moved into a house. I fulfilled every young Jewish boy's dream by being the Easter bunny for our Easter egg hunt the first year that we lived here in this new neighborhood. I wore a costume. I jumped up and down the park on a Sunday morning for the Easter egg hunt. But that meant that the person who organizes the thing, I went to their place, I got the costume, I got to meet them, and we built a great local community through things like that. Right? I'm not going to wear that. Those costumes are hot, dude. But those are the two cases where I think it makes sense to choose a contained period of time. I have pictures, Chelsea. But I mean, you don't know it's me. The funniest thing about the Easter costume was that I went, like, Calvin didn't know that it was me. We wanted to surprise him. And so, there's like tons of kids there, but I keep going up to Calvin and like going and giving him high fives and like picking him up for pictures and posing with pictures. And he had no idea that it was me. And then I just at one point, Tristan was like, Calvin, it's your father. And people got it on camera. It's pretty funny. I'll dig up a picture for you. But yeah, a month, 2 months, just to expand your bands, I think. And do it every so often. Doesn't need to be all the time. But every so often. What do you think, Gus? I like your watch.
What do I think? I think it takes me back to, I've been going through a period of my life for the last 4 years where I felt pretty unsettled. I'm sure a lot of people have as a result of the pandemic. But I took myself off and I traveled to Spain and Portugal, and I've been going there and back quite a bit. And I can absolutely resonate with what you just said, particularly the second element. I mean, I love the yes month, and I'm going to give that a go. I really am. I've got another bit of travel coming up pretty soon, but just when I went to Spain and Portugal, it's even more challenging if you don't speak the language that well.
Yeah.
But if you want to build community and you want to learn the language, because you do learn the language, if you have conversations with people in their native, you eventually do learn through not wanting to feel ignorant. And I tell you what, it was the best experience, and I've been back like countless times for like months, 2 months at a time as a result of that. Yeah, so it was, I can absolutely resonate, especially with that second one. That was thank you. I love this guy.
So a little bit personal. I mean, we never shared, Allison and I never shared that we were pregnant, but we had another miscarriage last week. And so I think that makes 7. And we were really hopeful, and it's pretty sad, but we've had time to, be in grief and mourn and everything. So we're okay. But there was only one person that I told that we were pregnant, which was the waiter at the cafe in Mexico the day before we left Mexico, when I was saying goodbye to him. And Allison's like, "You told the waiter that we were pregnant?" I was like, "Yeah, I needed to tell somebody." And one of the beautiful things about travel, one of the reasons why I love it so much, is that it allows you to explore somebody new, allows you to explore being somebody new. It's safe. You can test out being a different person in a really safe way. Our favorite saying to people that we meet on the road is to wish them to have a good life at the end of it. It's just a simple acceptance that we shared this time together and it was wonderful, and we're never going to see you again for the rest of our life. But I think that that's one of the greatest benefits of travel, is to just try being a different person for a short period of time when in a new place, and just see how it feels. I dig it.
Amber here. Thanks for listening in. This episode was from a group call from Jonathan's online trainer mentorship, where we host hot seats every 2 weeks. The mentorship is where we take anyone doing from $1,000 to $20,000 a month or more and help them scale up. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in learning more about, please DM the word mentor to Jonathan on Instagram @itscoachgoodman. If you're looking for another episode to listen to right now, I'd recommend episode 210, Marketing, Sales, and Life Inspiration from Oaxaca. You learn the most when you leave your normal environment. In case you haven't been able to do that recently, Jonathan shares stories from his trip to Oaxaca, Mexico to help inspire your marketing, sales, and life. In this episode, you'll learn the 3 product positioning takeaways from the struggling Monte Alban figurine vendor, how a 7-year-old sold more of their bad art than artists with good art, and 3 coaching lessons from the Oaxacan CrossFit gym. Again, that's episode 210, Marketing, Sales, and Life Inspiration from Oaxaca. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next week.